Good afternoon and welcome, folks that are joining us for today's webinar, exploring the role of social workers and social service workers in long-term care. We're really glad you're here today. We'll just give folks a moment to get connected and let some other people arrive, but we're glad you're here today. If you're having any technical difficulties, please feel free to reach out in the chat. We're happy to support you if you need it. If you're new to Zoom, you can access the chat on the bottom bar. You might see a little icon that says more with 3 dots. And when you click on that, you'll see chat with a little conversation. So you can just click on that to open the chat. If you have any technical difficulties, feel free to let us know. And we'll just wait a couple moments before we get started. Thanks for being here today. You can also feel free to turn your camera on if you want to today. No pressure if you don't want to. It is lunchtime, of course, and hopefully people are eating and taking a bit of a rest. We've just let some other folks in from the waiting room. Good afternoon and welcome if you're just getting connected. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us for today's webinar. Today we'll be exploring the role of social workers and social service workers in long-term care. We'll get formally started in a couple of moments once everyone's connected. Thanks for being here. I'm seeing a question in the chat pop up of whether is it possible to have a copy of the slides. Absolutely. We will share a PDF of the slide deck with the folks that are registered, and we'll also drop the PDF into the chat. Okay, and it is 12:01, so I think we will get started. I know there's likely to be a few more folks joining us, but welcome officially. Thank you so much for being here this afternoon with us for this webinar, exploring the role of social workers and social service workers in long-term care homes. My name is Michelle Fleming, and I'm a senior knowledge broker with the Ontario CLRI at Briere Health. And I'm really delighted to be here with you today and to be joined by my colleague, Amy McNally from Extendicare. So we will start things off with a land acknowledgement. So let's just take a few moments to acknowledge the land on which we're all participating in this session today. The calls to action from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission call upon us all to take pause and reflect. In this spirit, we begin by acknowledging the land on which we're joining from. And while we're all attending this event from different locations, we are all on Indigenous land. Where I am located, I am on the traditional, unceded, and unsurrendered territories of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation. And our ability to be working and living here now, this is a direct benefit of policies of expulsion and assimilation of Indigenous peoples during the time of settlement and confederation and since. And we know that the harms of these policies are still being felt in Indigenous communities today. And with this recognition, we continue to reflect on and move towards efforts to further reconciliation. Providing equitable access to health services for all people who live in Canada is a compelling social obligation that includes striving to ensure that there is culturally appropriate and culturally responsive health and long-term care services for Indigenous people. So we invite you to reflect on the land which you are on, and we'll share some links in the chat that will be some helpful resources to you. And together, let's walk a path of truth, justice, and healing towards true reconciliation. And with that, we will do a bit of a more formal introduction. So I mentioned at the top, my name is Michelle Fleming. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm a senior knowledge broker with the Ontario CLRI at Briere Health. And I have been with the team for just over 7 years. And prior to that, I worked in long-term care as manager of social services for 11 years in care homes. So this role is near and dear to my heart, as I used to be in this role. And I'm really excited to be able to support the community of practice that we've developed for the social workers and social service workers across the province. I'm delighted to be joined by my colleague Amy, and I'll pass it over to Amy to introduce herself.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining. Thank you, Michelle. My name is Amy McNally. I am a registered social worker. I've been in field for a very long time, but specifically social work and long-term care for just over 15 years. So happy to be sharing and having a chat.
Great, thanks so much, Amy. So just to get things started, just to tell folks a little bit about the Ontario CLRI, in case you've not heard of us before, we are here to strengthen the quality of life and care for residents across the province. We're a program of the Ministry of Long-Term Care, and we act as a resource to the sector. And our aim is to support the health and well-being of the people who live and work in long-term care homes. And so we do this by providing education and training, by sharing research and innovations, and we also identify and develop resources for long-term care homes. And we partner closely with the sector to provide solutions for priority issues. We're funded by the Government of Ontario, and we're hosted at 3 different sites, at Baycrest Health Sciences in Toronto, at Bruyere Health in Ottawa, where I'm hosted, and at the Schlegel UW Research Institute for Aging. And just wanted to acknowledge off the top that this particular initiative is a partnership between the Ontario CLRI at Bruyere and Family Councils Ontario. We've been working collaboratively with family councils since early in 2020 to support and run the social worker and social service worker community of practice. And we're also grateful for the partnership of Amy with Extendicare on developing this presentation for you all today. So today we're going to tell you a little bit about the community of practice that I've just mentioned, but the main focus is going to be hearing from Amy, who is one of the members of this community of practice. And this is actually our first time showcasing something that one of our members does in a more public kind of way outside of the regular meetings. So we're really excited about this opportunity. We will have some time at the end of the presentation today for some questions and answers. So we encourage you throughout this session, if you think of questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A box, and we will moderate going through some of those questions at the end. So we wanted to just start off by highlighting some of the things for you to know about the role specifically before we dive in, just to make sure everybody's on the same page. So one of the things to know is that the title of social worker and social service worker, these are both protected titles in Ontario. And so to utilize those titles, a person must be registered with the Ontario College of Social Workers and Social Service Workers. Registration requires ongoing professional development and learning. And just like all of the regulated health professions, there is a professional code of ethics and standards of practice. And those, if you're curious to learn more about those, you can find that information on the Ontario College of Social Workers and Social Service Workers website. And these roles have some really specialized training and skills to support quality of life and psychosocial well-being of residents and care partners. And having this role is a really great complement if you are in the process of shifting away from more institutional models of care towards more social, relational, and person-centered focus. And so we're going to pop into Mentimeter, which is a poll program that we like to use, because we'd like to hear a little bit from our audience, just to gain a sense of who are the folks that are here with us today. So if you have a smartphone handy, you can open up your camera app and point it at the screen to that QR code. And then if you touch the screen, there should be a little orange thing that pops up, take you into the Menti. We will also drop the link to the Menti in the chat as well. And you'll just enter in that code and it will take you to the first question. So, and some of these questions may be more or less relevant to you depending on your role and what organization you represent. And we'll just pivot the screen to show the Menti responses in a moment here. But the first question is looking at whether your long-term care home has the following roles, and to select all that apply, whether you have RSW, RSSW, both RSW and RSSW, or neither. So I'm seeing a lot of responses popping up on the screen. This is great. So a lot of homes have RSW. over 20 have responded that. 4 have the RSSW, 5 have both, 5 have neither. So for those that have neither, hoping that perhaps this webinar might encourage you to consider creating a role, perhaps. And perhaps if you have one and not the other, to consider the opportunity to create the opposite position. And okay, we can go on to the next question in the Menti there. I think folks have had an opportunity to answer, hopefully. And if you're not able to access the Menti for any reason, do feel free to just throw your responses in the chat if that's easier for you. And we were curious to get a sense, and this is something that we've talked about a fair bit at our community of practice, is the caseload of residents that are supported by RSW or RSSW. So looking here to get a sense of what type of caseload it is, perhaps the number of residents that an individual RSW or RSSW would be supporting. So seeing some responses popping up, a number of folks not sure. One saying high risk referrals. I'm seeing 254, 300, 30. And this is what we see in our COP. There's a broad range in terms of what this role is supporting in terms of number of residents. So this is really interesting. Up to 100 residents, seeing responses. We currently don't have RSW or RSSW at my long-term care home. Interesting in hearing about the benefits. And maybe we can just scroll down on the responses. Yeah, so seeing a bunch of different answers, right? 130, 200, 309, 256. Lots of variety. Thank you so much, everybody, for sharing your responses here. The whole building. Yeah, and this is often how it works. It's one person supporting the whole building. This is very familiar. All right, thanks so much, everybody, for responding to those Menti questions. And do keep the Menti open. We do have a couple of other questions we'll be asking as we go along. And if we can, maybe we can pivot back to the slide deck there. So wanted to just super briefly tell you a little bit about this community of practice. We started it back in 2020. And as I mentioned, it's a collaboration between Family Councils Ontario, the CLRI Health, and we've really been focused on capacity building and creating peer support opportunities. As we've just mentioned, often this role is one human supporting a whole lot of humans, and that can be difficult. And so this community of practice provides an opportunity for people to talk about their practice, talk about challenges, share resources and ideas with one another. And I'm pleased to say that we have over 150 members that are part of this group now, over 122 long-term care homes represented, and we have reps from 5 out of the 6 OH regions. And our goal is now to get somebody from that 6th region from the Northwest. And we've had some successes as a group. We made a submission to the Health Standards Organization National Long-Term Care Standards request for consultations. We also created a brochure to help dispel some of the misconceptions and myths about the role. What the role is, spelled out really clearly. And that brochure is used by many of the members for Social Work Month and as a way to promote the role and help people understand. And we also have an online hub where we have a discussion board and meeting materials as well as a resource library. And where can you find the brochure? Great question. We will circulate that as a PDF. I'll drop it in the chat and then we'll also circulate it afterwards as well. And we'll just go on to the next slide. Just wanted to share a couple of pictures of the group. We recently hit a major milestone, which was that we brought the group together in person for a meeting at York University. And it was wonderful to get to meet so many of the members in person for the first time. And this marks the beginning of what we hope will be more in-person engagements as we go forward. And the next slide has the QR code, which will give you the registration link. So if you are a registered social service worker or a registered social worker working in an Ontario home, or you are a student studying and doing placement in a long-term care home, we invite and encourage you to join this group. We meet monthly in virtual format most of the time, and we'd love to have you join. And we'll drop the link as well to the chat, in the chat for the registration. I see Peace has already done that. Thank you, Peace. And we do have some resources as well that we wanted to highlight that you can explore to learn a bit more about the role. One of the first resource that's highlighted there is actually a CLRI resource where we have a video that was developed by our colleagues at the CLRI at the RAA that highlights the different careers in long-term care. So there's one about all of the different roles within the interprofessional team and the leadership roles, but in particular, we're highlighting the one about social work today. And there's also some additional resources from the Ontario Association of Social Workers, as well as the Canadian Association of Social Workers, and some links to some previous presentations and recordings that might be of interest. And so with that, I'm going to hand things over to Amy to tell us all about the wonderful pilot that they've been doing at Extendicare. So over to you, Amy.
Thank you so much again, Michelle. So today we're going to talk about providing better mental health care services through the work of social work for residents and also families in long-term care. Next slide. So for those of you who may not know or not working for the organization, Extendicare is a leader in Canadian long-term care. We are one of Canada's largest senior care providers, delivering long-term care and home care across the country, committed to delivering high-quality care throughout the health continuum to meet the needs of growing seniors population. We've been around for over 50 years with 53 owned long-term care homes, 72 managed long-term care homes, and 22,000, I think, more by now, trained dedicated team members, and 10 million hours around there of home and community care annually are provided. So let's talk about the obstacles. Some of you in the chat had talked about high risk folks, and there's lots of risk times when we have residents come to us. So the journey, of course, into long-term care can be very stressful for not only our residents, but also the families. And of course, there is a process and transition into the long-term care home, especially from the community and not a transfer from another home. It's very complex, involves a lot of emotions throughout the journey, not just from pre-admission, but also through to end of life. So there will be a couple of times to do a bit of a pause throughout this. Do also would love to hear your feedback on our project. Definitely, oh, chat keeps popping. Definitely using feedback from our sector partners, in particular the COP. So if you can, when we go through the slides, if you can be thinking of what you're listening or hearing, or thinking of and feel when you hear social work, specifically long-term care. So imagine, this is what we did, 2021 or earlier, how we could improve the role, not just the RSW role, but the RSSW role. We're going to talk about how we did it, what specifically we did do, and that we've modified the role completely. So learning objectives today are to understand the difference, but also the benefits of having both a registered social worker and a registered social service worker on interdisciplinary teams. Also to learn how to attract more social workers and social service workers to the sector and explore ways to measure successes or challenges of the use of both roles in delivery of long-term care services. Next. So let's give a bit of a background. So fortunately, we had something to jump off of. So back in 2014, Extendicare actually hired researchers and brought us all together after lots and lots of surveys to understand how we were spending our time. A result of that publication indicated that 76% of us said we literally lacked the time to provide psychosocial support to residents. Social workers spent majority of the time on pre-admission phase of entering long-term care. And so we imagined, well, could someone else support new residents and their families and dedicate more time specifically to that part? So we shifted the social work role to a clinical focus, so from clerical to clinical, which we'll get into. And then, of course, the pandemic highlighted the critical need for resident mental health supports. No surprise there. Next slide. So what specifically did we do? So in 2021, we started a pilot project about the role of social work in long-term care, which is now implemented. The regional director of 9 of those homes in the GTA Southeast regions was the visionary and the sponsor. Just going back to that, the regional director at the time, he's no longer with us, his name is Nick. He moved up. So he actually worked hand in hand with social workers and social service workers and saw frontline what we were doing, and always imagined, okay, we can do better. So talks started early summer of 2021, and then we slowly rolled some things out. I say slowly, it was good that we did. So we had lessons learned along the way, which I can also share. Next slide. So I'm going to read this verbatim because we're talking about the Fixing Long-Term Care Act. So psychosocial care in the preamble section of the Act outlines the government's commitment to provide psychosocial care to residents. In addition, Section 13 of the Act states that long-term care homes shall ensure that there's an interdisciplinary program that addresses residents' psychosocial needs. The ministry has implemented year 3 of a 4-year long-term care staffing plan. It's called A Better Place to Live and a Better Place to Work, literally Ontario's long-term care staffing plan. And the core focus of this plan is to expand resident access to allied health care, including us, and to increase the hours of direct care provided by allied health staff to 30 minutes per day per resident every 4 weeks. So thank you, Ministry of Health. And if there's any persons from the ministry here, we thank you for joining today. Next slide. So who are we? I know Michelle touched on it. One of the reasons we keep saying this is a lot of folks didn't really understand who we are. So we do have a university degree of 4+ years for registered social workers. And our scope is, according to the college, assessment, diagnosis, treatment, and then evaluation. So for example, we might implement after an assessment, psychotherapy, which is a controlled and regulated act towards optimum psychosocial well-being. Registered social service workers have community college diploma, and it's approximately 2 years with a placement. And their focus is more on supportive counseling and practical help, such as service navigation. And we're going to talk about how we make for a wonderful team together. Next slide. So just a reflection moment again. So knowing that registered social workers are the largest providers of mental health care in Ontario, can you start to see how our project model has value? Can you see our vision? And maybe if some thoughts are coming to your mind right now, if you could take an opportunity and just put it in the chat. I won't be going through or addressing them in this moment, but we'll have them for later. I'll just pause for a sec. So far, we're still at 10. So, okay, let's go to the next slide. Oh. Perfect. Next slide. I keep having to close it. Okay. So what did we do? We specifically introduced a new role of an admission coordinator, but with strategy, and chose registered social service workers as the ideal fit. And so it is a full-time role. So they also fill gaps in social work service delivery by responding to the social worker referrals within scope of practice. So if I'm away on vacation or not in for whatever reason, and vice versa, they fill in for us when we're away. And again, we shifted the social work role from clerical to clinical. Next slide. So admission coordination, the admission coordinator, also registered social service worker, I'm going to keep intertwining that title, is the primary for pre-admission paperwork, tours, and inquiries from the community. So I don't know if you've ever taken tour booking calls. I have. Booking a tour alone can be very stressful. People are navigating an entire healthcare system, many of which absolutely know nothing about entering long-term care, nor have they necessarily planned to do so. And people have asked who actually reads the applications for long-term care. Reviews are actually interdisciplinary because we're trying to envision, can we create a plan of care before this resident arrives? The focus is building trust at the start before admission day. So lots of contact, but also to set realistic expectations for all of us to be a team. So we consider our families and residents to be part of the continuum of care and be part of our team together. And they also follow that new resident during the initial 6 weeks and throughout the journey right up to end of life. There's typically a 6-week care conference that most of you are aware of. It is legislated. And what happens is when we all go to the care conference, the social service worker provides an update from their perspective as to how well the resident integrated, but they also actively call and follow up with the residents and families during the first few weeks too. And I remember a few examples where a family member was really upset they weren't able to come in, they were ill and didn't want to. So the admission coordinator actually called her every single day until she said she felt comfortable. So that's one example. Next slide. So what else did we do? The social workers had advanced training in grief, trauma, but also in burnout, which was a new and rising theme from the pandemic. And then the admission coordinators changed the admission experience to be more personal, like I mentioned with the phone calls. And like I said, to build trust and realistic expectations. So for the folks that might think, I'm selling my condo, I can bring everything in, and then they're disappointed to see, especially in some of the older buildings, that it's absolutely not realistic. It's easier to explain to people and show them a tour and give them lots of time to digest, I guess, the huge transition that it is. Both roles were certified in trauma-informed care. There is going to be a link at the end of this slideshow to tell you how to do it for free through Alberta Health Services. Next slide. So we've talked to our peers and learned, especially from the COP and just in general from the field, we gathered some ad hoc data, and we learned that a lot of us are saying, okay, what are our assessments? What do we do? What maybe is in the electronic healthcare record, such as point-click care? We know necessarily maybe we do a psychosocial assessment, but everybody seemed to kind of look different and maybe have a different flavor. So some of the highlights we built into point-click care for Extendicare. We looked at examples such as the whole family system, but also the dynamics. So imagine, I'm sure there's some director of care out there, administrators or EDs. If you have a family member walk in, residents saying, absolutely, I don't want to see my daughter. It would be nice to be able to open up that assessment and see, okay, there are things going on here, and to be more prepared that that might not be a friendly family visit. There might be some tension there. And so going with that, we're going to be looking at coping techniques while a resident can still tell us, or we can gather that from the family. How did you cope in the past in order to come up with strategies to cope with change and different grief loss issues along the continuum? We did look at prior trauma, again, to provide better trauma-informed care. It also helps with a behavior support care plan if we know for someone, for example, who's had abuse in the past and they have some responsive expressions, perhaps during care, perhaps at night. Could be as simple as educating the staff on, keep the lights on, do everything as possible to support a safe care experience. We also looked at strengths, which is something we typically do, coming from a strengths perspective, but also what supports were needed to be in place. Could be something simple, such as an actual formal power of attorney that needs to be put into place. And these can be done by both roles. It's a little fluid, and also values. So part of my role, I actually sit on a national ethics services team for the organization. So knowing our own personal values is critical so that we're not putting our own values on the resident experience. So we actually talk about what's important to you, which is quite different than other assessments. One tricky part was that we didn't want to step on the toes of the recreation staff because there is a psychosocial assessment in the RIMDS, I'm sure you know, um, and trying to find the I guess the uniqueness of what social workers do and can do without a lot of crossover. Next slide. So we did track a lot of data along the way. This is early on from the project. Um, this is an interesting one because we actually tracked referrals by type. Now, I will say one thing though, we used point-click care. We all had referrals in point-click care that somebody could go in and do a referral. So this doesn't necessarily reflect verbal referrals, telephone referrals, referrals, just walking through and having anybody from the care team say, hey, could you please go see so-and-so? So it is using data from that. And we realized, notice depression, 56%, taking over the pie graph there. Roommate issues was an interesting one, especially in the smaller homes with those challenges. We just kind of put that in there at 21% to track the anomalies. But notice the red, so 8% after the pilot project had started, because we were more on the floors and visible and at the nursing stations, walking the hallways, doing what I call informal rounds, we started to see family requests, and that is only growing. So that was nice to see. Slide. We also saw more referrals in point-click care because, again, that opportunity was there. This is rather drastic. So in 2020, there were 1.83 referrals per month for the social worker. The first home launched October 15th in 2021. And by November of that year, there were 18 referrals per month. So massive spike. Other homes were similar, and other homes we captured like touch points, any charting opportunities. We would run chart notes to see, did the social worker chart? Was it an interaction? And we overall saw about a 75% increase in what I'll call touch points with residents and families. Next slide. We did gather feedback, which was more data. But before I go and quote these, I'll also say we measured so many other things that we just, for lack of time, didn't put in this particular deck. We actually have, I think there's about 15 surveys. We used Microsoft Forms to put surveys out to gather data pre-project, during the project, and now while the project is in full swing and implemented, such as, how would you feel if there was a social worker in your home? Would you feel it would be a better experience for staff, residents, families? Skyrocket stats on that one. And then we survey admission day, just to gather, okay, what are we doing? Are we doing it well? What are some improvements? And again, please be thinking of some ways that we could improve this model as we continue to grow. So the Family Council from Extendicare Peterborough, that home was the most recent one. I think it's been a year and a half now, to start the role, and they were echoing a social worker as such a needed position in the home from the council. And then this was actually a family member I talked to. It's a little more emphatic than that, but I'm just capturing what he had told me because I had explained to him about the project to get his consent to see if I could quote, and explained that some homes just don't have a social worker. He said, what? I don't understand. Who on earth would I call? What if there was no social worker? Who do people call? Seriously, I am quoting. Who would I talk to? I mean, the RN's great. She's medical. Her name's Stu. Makes absolutely no sense. And this family member does call me a lot. The resident has some complex mental health issues, so he does touch base with me frequently if he feels like the resident is not at her baseline. And that would be one example where input, but also psychosocial support to families is critical as part of our team. You can go to the next slide. Wanted to have a bit of a visual here. So back to Extendicare Peterborough. This is Mike on the, it should appear on your left, with Phyllis. And on the right is Morgan. Mike is a social service worker. He actually did his placement under myself and the admission coordinator at the local home where I work, and ended up jumping right into long-term care. Absolutely loved it. So it's nice to be able to promote the role from within the organization, but also with students straight out of school. And Morgan, we really did use a lot of a peer model. She was a new grad and had not worked in long-term care, knew about it, but didn't really understand the role. So I think critical if you're thinking about adopting this model, Morgan had extensive peer support, which now she's just flying on her own. And a lot of people are reaching out to her for resources and her opinions and feedback and thoughts. So we'll talk more about peer groups, and I'd love to explain either today or on another call how to roll out a peer group and make it successful. We can go to the next slide. So some feedback, we talked about retention, how to attract more social workers and social services workers to the field. So these are some captures from two admission coordinators. Social work project gives registered social service workers such as myself a huge opportunity. I love my job. Her name is Leanne from Extendicare Oshawa. We actually promoted a lot from within the organization. A lot of people have asked, has it been difficult to recruit? Actually not. We found that the SSWs were a little displaced in their roles in the community, and a lot of them were doing recreation frontline program staff. So they felt, okay, getting stable hours, not working weekends, unless of course, they need to jump in. For the most part, it was considered a promotion, and absolutely loved the change. And then this is Mike again. You saw his smiling picture. He says, I really enjoy having the opportunity to do that engagement with families during one of the most significant life transitions, offering information, honestly answering questions and concerns, but also easing that burden of guilt, and witnessing residents and families thrive as they transition into the next stage of their lives, knowing I had a small part of that success. So thank you, Mike and Leanne. Next slide. Back to peers. Okay, so capacity building and mentorship, like I said, has been absolutely critical. And recruitment, this all ties in. So we are part of the hiring and onboarding process. I actually redid the job description and also the job posting for social workers. And we are on the interview process. We even redid the interview guide to make for more clinical questions and targeted social work specific questions and answers. And orientation is on site with another social worker and or admission coordinator. And then we do active follow-up. Both roles have peer groups. So we do use Microsoft Teams. We have set meeting times with set routine agendas. Could be complex rounds, ethical dilemmas. Sometimes that collides a little together. And we literally have an open Teams chat that we can fire off a question and have that quick phone a friend time that is very live and active. And recently we started a national platform, I guess a mini COP, using Microsoft Teams nationally for SSWs and SWs to be able to reach out and do that phone a friend as well. We're hoping to keep that, building that as more people join the organization. Next slide. So this question keeps coming up. How can I start? What can I do? What were the bumps along the way? Tell us, give us the information. So we'd be really, really happy if you roll it out in your own organizations. So if you just want to reflect again, how do you think you could use the new funding model from the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care? Could you at least start by hiring a social worker if you don't have one? or a social service worker? And if you have a social worker or social service worker, would you please consider utilizing them to their full scope of practice by having the model of care that's in this presentation to meet the mental health needs of residents and families in long-term care? Next slide. I think we'll have good time for questions. Now, there's a lot of questions around the differences between social workers and social service workers. So if you want to use your phone, if you have one handy, and take a picture of this, this was a great article I found to really explain the differences. And then also credits to Deborah Bakhti. She is the president of a company called Think Breakthrough Incorporated, and um, actually, she does a lot of training around redesigning culture. And this is specifically where the social workers and social service workers had direct training from Deb around changing that, that transactional day one of admission to an experience and relationship building and a relational first time. And here you are for the free certification from Alberta Health Services in trauma-informed care. And if you click on a link, you can actually Google it, it'll come straight up and you just click on that link. As long as you're working in healthcare, you can access this. I would advise doing it off-site. Feedback has been people are getting pretty emotional doing this training. And yeah, so if you're planning on it, you might want to do it from home. Next slide. Back to the mentee.
Yeah, so if folks want to pull out their phone again or go to the www.menti.com and enter that code on the screen, which is 31679078. We wanted to just hear a bit from folks around the funding that Amy was just mentioning, which is the Resident Wellbeing Fund. We're curious if folks were already aware of that, if you're using it to support having RSW or RSSW positions, or perhaps you're utilizing it to support other allied health professions. So we'll just get the responses up on the screen in a moment here. I'm curious. Okay, so lots of responses saying, no, this is the first time I'm hearing about it. So that's great. We'll drop a link in the chat to information about that fund. And looks like a couple of folks are saying, yes, they're using it either to support social workers and social service workers or using it for other allied health professionals. And some have heard about it, but they're not quite sure how their home is utilizing it. But definitely a lot more unaware of it. So that's great that this is coming up. Amy, I don't know if you want to expand on that a little further.
Yeah, sure. So thanks, Michelle. So I'm actually sitting on the advisory board for the Ontario Association of Social Workers, and they played a huge role in lobbying the ministry for funding with the intention to be RSWs in long-term care, specifically for optimum psychosocial well-being, which ties back into the Act. And I'm hoping to use some of this feedback to take back to that group so that we can, nudge a little bit more to see if we can get some more funding beyond the next year, and also to get some stats on who was using it. So thanks, Michelle, for adding this question. I'd be really excited to take this data back to that advisory board for sure. And if you want to message Michelle independently or individually, if you're not too sure, then she and I can coordinate. Interesting.
Absolutely. And I think there's one more question that's connected to this, is just a specific question around how you've utilized the Resident Wellbeing Fund, if you know about it. And maybe there won't be a lot of answers to that question based on what we just saw, but if your home is utilizing that fund, we're just curious to see a bit more specifics. If you're using it for different allied health professions, which roles are those that you're boosting up with that additional funding? Okay, and somebody might be hiring an SSW. Some have added more hours for recreation. That's great. And like I said before, if you've got any difficulty accessing the Menti, feel free to put your responses in the chat. Someone saying, I don't know, my home has low transparency for funding. Okay. Some have used it for BSO. Would be nice if it was RSW specific. And another respondent is saying they added social work. They did not have one prior to 2021. Yeah, and we've heard that quite a bit through our community of practice, that a number of roles were created because of this resident well-being fund. So um, a full-time social worker. Great. Yeah. So some used it to boost up the hours and some used it to create a position. Oh, perfect. And I see somebody beat me to it in getting the memo about the policy in the chat there. So there is a link there. Thank you so much for doing that, Erica. You're speedy. And I see Bianca also posted a link as well about long-term care funding and reporting. So thank you for those. All right, let's go back to the slides. And now we're going to turn the floor over to everyone that's here today and see if folks have some questions. There were some questions also that we received from the registrations. We actually have so many exceptional questions. We will get through as many of them as we can today. But Amy and I chatted in preparation for this, and what we're going to do is actually put together a document because Amy's constantly receiving questions from folks as she's been doing presentations about this. And so we want to kind of curate a list of FAQs about this, and we're going to put that together as a resource for folks, and we'll share that with everyone who registered for this webinar. The recording will be available as well as the PDF of the slide deck, and we'll have those all available as well on the CLRI website afterwards as a resource. But I'll start with one of the first questions that comes actually from the registration questions. So Amy, this is a great one. What are the most important things that social workers and social service workers should know when they're working in long-term care? Start with that one.
Wow. Okay. I hear this a lot. So every day is different. It's probably one of the more dynamic fields that I've ever worked in. I mentioned I've been in social work for a very long time, so I can compare it to different roles in the community, different organizations. But the I think that's what makes it so fascinating and interesting, is working with people of all ages, different backgrounds, and again, through major life changes, but also being part of an interdisciplinary team where you're working with physiotherapists, dietitians, really collaborating, working with responsive expressions. Um, so I can't really say, what it's like other than it's dynamic. You might have a squirrel that day. Okay, off to a crisis. You could be running a code white if there was an urgent situation in the home. It could be anything from that, or literally sitting at someone's bedside when they're end of life and offering that quality time so that the family or family system knows that their loved one is not alone.
That's lovely. Thanks, Amy. Really well said. It's definitely a dynamic role. No day is the same as the day before, and there's so much that can be learned from the role and the opportunity to work in someone's home and work within the interprofessional team as well. All right, the next question is, what role do systemic factors such as funding or policy play in supporting or hindering these initiatives? And this maybe ties back a bit to what we were just discussing with the mentee.
So, I mean, the funding really did highlight the opportunities to onboard social workers and social service workers. Systemically, I don't know, how can I word this? The pandemic highlighted mental health around the world. And knowing that we are the largest providers of mental health supports, psychotherapy, and counseling, I would think that would be more at the macro level. Meso level organizations are starting to adopt and using the funding. And then at the micro level, I think we've really been shifting our focus, especially with this project model as an example, to providing psychotherapy, direct psychosocial supports, and freeing up from the clinical, more towards a clinical focus to to really focus on the psychosocial care in a clinical fashion. So I hope that answers the question. We can elaborate later if not.
Thanks, Amy. There's been a couple of questions that have come up in the chat throughout the session so far, and I would encourage folks to add their questions as well to the Q&A box. So you were speaking during your presentation about the RSW assessments, and so someone is asking, would all of this information be collected in one assessment on Point Click Care, and would it be the admission coordinator that's completing this assessment?
Yeah, great question. So yes, the registered social work assessment is one assessment with a whole bunch of questions. It's just free typing because you can actually reopen it and add to it, put a date that you've now learned more information. It's not the social service worker that does it. It's not part of the admission specifically. I find that it's easier to do a more thorough assessment after someone's been in the home for 2 weeks or more. So it's quite fluid, but it is an RSW assessment. We're looking at building an RSSW assessment separately.
That's great. Thank you. And someone else is wondering, what exactly does the admission coordinator do? So maybe you could just go into a bit like what a typical day looks like, even though no
Yeah,
typical day is ever the same.
exactly. So the admission coordinator's focus is, answering the tour calls, actively walking people through the home, asking, taking the calls with questions from community members, active stakeholder engagement, um, literally supporting the new resident and family moving into the home, accompanying them to the room, touring them around, spending a lot of time on day one, active follow-up, but also we're not just thinking of a new person as the new admission, it's creating relationships. They might be introducing that person to peers, taking them to a program, helping them to integrate with a personal one-on-one flavor, but also knowing, hey, you can call me at any time if you need assistance. They do other roles that could be something like, okay, you need to be able to get here to see your sister. So if you don't drive, let's figure out handy transit. I'll help you fill out that application. So the admission experience is more than just reading or printing. For those of you who are still printing applications, it's more than that. It's really providing an experience during a very stressful and dynamic time. It is a full-time role, Kelly. Yes.
That's great. Thank you, Amy. Okay, another question that we got, this one's also from the registration. How are the roles of social workers and social service workers in long-term care evolving?
Interesting. So the project model, I'll go back to this because it's what I know best, is the focus on mental health. Focus also on more involvement with the BSO teams and committees in the homes. That's still fairly new. If I go back in time, it's also evolving. So also different committees, different requirements in the act, having a quality lead, being on continuous quality, monthly meetings, gathering data, overall making for better quality of life, advocating for resident rights, being part of teams and being recognized, not working in silos. And this all ties back into the act. That's been a huge shift over the course of time. And we do work together. We are peers. So we pick each other's brains and talk multiple times a day, as do we with the behavior supports nurse. If you have one in the home, we're actively engaged. We're on the home areas and collaborative, you know, in a collaborative model and interdisciplinary care.
That's great. Thanks so much, Amy, for that reflection. I feel like the awareness about the role has increased also. I mean, if that can be an evolution, just that more folks are aware of this role as being important. And, as Amy was saying, that everything that came to light during the COVID pandemic, which was not news to anybody that's been in the sector, but it shone a light, I think, on a lot of different things. Okay, another question that's coming up in the chat. Is the admission coordinator also connecting with Ontario Health at Home for the moving in and admission paperwork?
Yeah, they're the primary contact for Ontario Health at Home. Absolutely, that is their role. They are the liaison.
Great. Okay, another question. Do you have data highlighting caregiver satisfaction rates or less altercation between staff and caregivers? I know that there are often tensions due to families and care partners feeling that communication is often an issue due to staff shortages or barriers and not feeling part of the care team. I'm wondering how it also looks with a relational approach to care post-transition.
Great question. That's a lot of questions in one. So I'll piece out a couple of them. So we actually do a survey on admission to kind of feel out how people are feeling about admission day, pre-admission day. We also measured complaints. Went back in time from pre-project model to current state, and one static top of mind happens to me. We received one concern, actually two, that were easily rectified on day one, um, out of 96 new admissions, newly admitted residents. That was drastic. Typically, that time in those first few days is, things like, oh, the room was going to be so small. Why didn't anybody tell me there's a routine for breakfast? Yeah, one out of 96 to 98. So we collected that data, making the more relational experience. We actually changed the care conference. I don't even like to call it that, and encourage families to just, call if you have concerns, tell us in the moment. It's hard to go back in time. We want to make it right now, and just encouraging more open dialogue. And it really changed the flavor of even the care conference. I can't remember since the project hearing a concern at a care conference, even as simple as a lost sock. It's because we've already said, we're not perfect. We're all human. We're part of the same team. And so the focus is now on quality of life of the residents in care and not necessarily on those transactions. I think that speaks to that question somewhat.
Yeah, I think it definitely does. And Kathleen asked, or made the point of wondering whether you'd find some feedback in the family satisfaction surveys for each of the homes. Perhaps you're seeing less concerns coming up there in the homes where the model's being piloted.
Yeah, so I think it was 2 years ago now that Extendicare added social work to the resident and family satisfaction survey. So we've been collecting data nationally, literally like custom data sort of pull to see where the homes are doing that are part of the project. So we are measuring that, but it's fairly new to be able to come up with much data. It's only been 2 years.
Mm, that's great. Thanks, Amy. And we are almost out of time. I think I'll grab one more question here from the chat. Should RSWs and RSSWs both be present during care conferences?
Absolutely. And particularly the first one.
Mhm.
The social worker has a huge focus of what they present, and I won't go into that, but maybe on a COP, we could do that for the social workers that attend. The social service worker literally does a summary of how that person has integrated, or maybe not, and what the current challenges are. So they do their piece based on from the transition, and the social worker more so on how the residents say, they were down and with some psychotherapy and some depression assessments, could be that, um, how they have transitioned, but also to get feedback, obviously, from the resident as to how they can make things better. But definitely, they're both there, at least for the first one, and the social service worker books the family meetings, care conferences, throughout the years, so they maintain contact that way too.
That's great. Well, thank you so much, Amy, for being part of this session today and sharing your experiences and this great program that you're running. We'll go on to the next slide. It has my email address in case folks are wanting to reach out with additional questions. Feel free to reach out anytime, and I'll answer what I can, and what I can't, I will field to Amy. We're trying to save Amy's inbox a little bit because she is in a clinical role and doesn't have a lot of time to answer external questions. And like I said at the start, we will be sharing an FAQ document with the questions that we haven't been able to answer today. And we'll just go on to the next slide. We would love to hear some feedback from folks that participated in the session today. Your feedback's really valuable to us. It helps us in planning future opportunities like this. And so, yeah, invite you to visit the Mentee. We'll also send the link out to this along with the slide deck and the recording afterwards as well. But yeah, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today over your lunch. We really appreciate your time. And thanks for your interest in this subject. And follow the CLRI on social media if you haven't done so already. Sign up for our newsletter on our website so you can stay up to date on opportunities like this in the future. Have a wonderful day, everybody. Take good care.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for being here.